Hi everyone! Today I'll be showing you around After Effects and giving a little introduction to the software. I know that sometimes it feels like this software is endless and it can be really hard to start using it, but I find that if you understand the basics of what I'll be showing you today, you'll be able to do lots of things in After Effects, and most importantly, you will understand how the software works, which means you'll be able to explore and try things out without feeling like you're just pressing random buttons and hoping for the best. So let's get to it. So starting with what you see when you open After Effects, there's two options here: New Composition and New Composition from Footage. Now throughout this tutorial, I will be comparing things to Premiere Pro, because if you're watching this, you are most likely familiar with Prem, and it helps if you think of things on After Effects the same way. So the composition is basically your sequence. And just like Prem, you can create a sequence and choose its settings before you import the footage, or you can do like the drag the footage in and create the sequence based on the properties of that footage. So when you create a composition from footage, you just have to choose what clip you want and import it, and there you go. If you create a new composition, you get to choose the aspect ratio, most likely 1920 by 1080p, frame rate, most likely 25 frames per second, and the duration of the composition. So After Effects is not made for editing full-length film. It is made for editing individual clips and manipulating them. It's kind of like Photoshop for video. And then when you have all of these clips, you put them together in Premiere Pro. So we will go for 20 seconds. It doesn't matter if it's more than the length of your video. We can always trim that later, but make sure it's not less. So now you have the composition, and to import your footage, just drag it to the bottom. So let's take a tour of the workspace. First thing at the top, we can find our tools bar, much like Photoshop and Prem. Looking at the left panel, we find our project window, and this is exactly the same as Premiere. So this is where you find your clips and composition or compositions, any shapes you might have, and all your elements essentially are here. And in the same panel, you can also find the effect controls window. Now, we don't have anything here yet, but this is where the different settings and options will be when you add effects, and we'll explore that later. Moving on to the composition window, this is just your program monitor where you can watch your footage in real time. On the right panel, you will find lots of different options that you can open, so let's talk about some of them. Effects and presets, that's where you browse all your effects, and we will talk more about that later. Align allows you to easily position your clip in different parts of the frame. Character is all to do with text, so when you add text, this is where you're going to change the font and size and everything like that. And Tracker allows you to track things in your clip, and it's something that you'll find yourself using a lot. Now this deserves its own video, and if you want to start learning more about that, you can check our video on 3D camera tracking. Now finally, we have our timeline, where we put our elements together just like we do in Premiere Pro. So there's a lot of things to explore here, but just before we move on, if you ever find that you've changed all of these windows around and you have no idea how to get back, just go to Window at the top, Workspace, and reset default to saved layout. So as you can see, you have this green bar on top of your clip. This is the render bar. So in After Effects, your clips render as they play. So as you start adding more things to your timeline, and when you make changes to the effects or keyframes, you will find that you'll most likely need to let that play out once to let it think through, and then the second time it will play out smoothly. Now if you look at the size of this clips bar, you will see that it is shorter than the composition time. So when you scroll, you find that there's just a black screen, and maybe you don't want that. So what do? Well, you can drag this bar, which is your work area, to the end of your clip. And then if you right click on it and select the option Trim Comp to Work Area, it will trim that composition to the length of your video or to wherever you want. Now looking at the left part of the timeline, you can see your clips' names. By the way, it's a very good practice to give your clips names, because if you will find that it will quickly become a mess of numbers and generic names, and you won't know where anything is anymore. So definitely give your clips names. And you'll see this arrow here, and if you click on it, you'll find lots of options like opacity, rotation, scale, position. And as you add things to the clip, like effects or masks, they will appear here. So you will see that you'll spend a lot of time looking at these options and arrows. Now, a big part of After Effects is animating the different elements, and for that we have keyframes. So next to pretty much all of these options you have on your clip, you find a stopwatch. And you might already be familiar with this from Premiere Pro, but this is how you access the keyframes. So let's demonstrate what they do. So when you first click on the stopwatch, and we're going to use scale for this example, it will create a keyframe, basically saying to the software, at this specific time, I want the scale of my clip to be 100%. Now, if we move like 2 seconds in and change the scale to 120, it will create another keyframe, meaning that when it reaches 2 seconds, the scale will be 120%. Now, when we play that back, we see that we just animated the scale to go from 100 to 120%. And you can do this with almost anything. And another tip here, if you select the keyframes and hit F9, you will get something called Easy Ease, which will make the transitions look extra smooth. Now let's get into some more fun things that you can do. So let's look at masks. Masks are everything in After Effects. They essentially allow you to select elements of your clip and isolate them. So let's, for example, create a mask of this house. So with your clip selected, go to this pen tool and draw a path around the house by creating points. Now, this one is very easy because it's just straight lines, but you can also curve the pen line by clicking and dragging it like this. And once you close the shape, you will see that we can only see the house now. So let's open our options here, and you will see that a mask section has been created. Now there's a couple of important things here, like this add option. So by default, it will be on add, meaning that you want to keep what's inside the mask. But if you select, for example, subtract, you will get only what's outside the mask. Another important thing here is feather option, which allows you to kind of soften the edges of the mask, which can be a really handy thing. So let's look at this in action. What can you actually do with all of this information? Let's try to make, for example, some text come out from behind the house. So the first thing you want to do is to duplicate this layer. And on the top layer, which is the one that is the most visible, let's again create a mask of the house. Now you can't really see it because you have the original one underneath, but if you scale this layer up and down, for example, you will see that we have a mask of the house on top. Now let's add some text. Now to do this, just click on the T option in the tools bar, click on your image and type whatever you like. Like I mentioned before, you can edit your font on the right. And let's put this text behind the house to begin with. So move it, and then move the text layer so it's underneath the mask. Now opening the text layer options, click on the position stopwatch to create the first keyframe, which is behind the house, and then move forward and change the position of the text. Now if you want, select those keyframes you've just made and press F9 on the keyboard for a smooth transition, and now play it back to see how it looks. So this is not the most exciting thing ever, but in this short exercise you have used keyframes, text, masks, and hopefully you understand the idea here. You have the background, a mask of the house on top as the most visible layer, and the text between the two moving from behind the house. Okay, so just a couple more things to touch on. Let's talk about shapes. Another big part of After Effects is shapes, which can be used for many things. You can literally use shapes to create full-on 2D animations. So to create shapes, you can either use this tool, and by clicking and holding it, you can access other shapes, and then just create them by dragging them on the screen. Another option is to use the pen tool to create your own shapes. It's just like creating a mask, just make sure that you don't have any clips selected in the timeline so you don't accidentally create any masks. And again, you can use keyframes on the shapes to move them around or create custom transitions or anything you like. And finally, we're going to talk about effects. So there are basically endless possibilities here, and there is really no other way to understand what all of these effects do other than to try them out one by one. But I will say that you don't actually need to know them all. You will find yourself using like 10% of these effects and being able to do a lot with that. Some effects are kind of straightforward, like hue and saturation or blur. But then you have things like liquefy or cartoon, which are a bit more interesting, all the way to stuff like this. So definitely try these out, and as you progress, you will find out more and more about these effects. So I know I said that was the last thing, but I just remembered something that is really useful to know, and something that you will definitely be doing a lot, and that is precompositions. So I have come up with this little example where our footage of the house from before is now playing on this TV screen. So if we look at our layers here, we only have the TV room and the house footage. But if you watch it, you can see that our screen has loads of things going on. It has text and transitions with shapes, but where are those layers? Well, this top layer is actually a composition, and if we double click on it, you can see that it opens this composition in like a new tab, and all of the layers are here. Why is this useful? Well, if I want to make a change to the screen without adding anything else, I can open the screen composition, change whatever I want, like add color, and then when I go back to our main composition with the TV room, we can see that it only affected the screen. So it's basically grouping things together so that you can move them or edit them as a group instead of having a million layers that you need to adjust one by one, if that makes sense. And to make one of these compositions, you just have to select the layers you want to group together, right-click, and select Precompose. And press OK, and there you go. So that was a basic introduction to After Effects. Hopefully you understand what you're looking at and what things do, and from here you can explore on your own. And hopefully this will get you started doing cool things. Definitely try it out for yourself, even if it's just a title animation. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you are trying things out and getting used to the software.